It's always running against time, because you have to produce the paper before 5 o'clock in the morning. I remember when I was small, I went to the company producing this paper, waiting outside the main gate.
等買報紙嘛，
Once they produce, they open up the
攞
gate.
報紙賣嘛
I buy 100 pages,
Yes.
100
，100
pages,
copy
yeah,
係
100 sectors, and then
喺佢 story
hold
嗰
it
度
under my arm, run along certain streets, as run shouting, newspaper for sale. And then, because it's early, or 6 or 7 o'clock, some people want early newspaper to read. Sell it, say, £1 If I buy 100 pages from the factory, I would have earned £10. What do you know it? When I was small, 13 or 12, that's the job I did. I took the money home, give
發
to
死
my
咗
mother.
嘛，佢要養家，
And later, I became mobile hawker because the factory refused now to close the gate. There's no more. They just want to sell to the company. I became a mobile hawker. Do you know what mobile hawker? Mobile hawker is one who goes out in the morning buying some goods from a factory and then sell it along a route in the morning at higher price in order to get some profit. As running, carrying 2 baskets, put the goods in front and at the back to sell it. On one occasion, I bought some wires, electric wires, you see, at a cheap price. And I was going to the company buying these wires in order to sell it with the profit. I was stopped on the way by a plainclothes detective riding on a bicycle. He stopped me. Where did you get from? The wire. I said, I bought it. You wouldn't believe it. Come with me to the police station. And then took me to the police station, put me aside for almost the whole night, and then put me in a cell. And in the cell, I stayed for 5 to 7 days. And then, all of a sudden, the door was opened, off you go. So I was released. I was very small, 13 years of age or something like that. Funny enough.
Yeah, Daddy wrote a book about his life. I have a copy in Hong Kong.
佢話佢接裝嘛，
Oh dear, 即係 receive stolen goods. How many days?
佢咗一個禮拜，
一個禮拜啊 How many days? 1 week 啊 Oh, that must be bad.
間房最細嘅佢嘛，
你有啲咩想食啊？
What?
除咗乾炒牛河，有啲咩想食啊？What do you like eating? 想唔想食條蒸魚啊？
Good.
要去買啦，梗係。Maybe you have to catch it。
Yeah,
等我幫你買條蒸魚嚇。買條蒸魚，唔知有冇石斑咧？
Good for dinner. And later, many years later, after I worked in the army as a mouse coach operator for the army. The county government was defeated by communists. So I had to make a decision whether to go with the army or stay in Shandong. I made the decision to stay with my family in Shandong, but that won't be allowed. The army won't allow you. So I had to run away from the military front of fighting the communism.
Do you think?
Ran away for nearly whole night. And then called a bicycle driver, a man riding on a bicycle, go to the city of Shandong. He agreed to take me on payment of $1. I got $1, paid him. Took me all the way inside Shandong, so I felt safe. Still, I had nowhere to live, nowhere to eat, nothing, unless I go back home. But I can't do that, because if I went back home, I was afraid they might chase me and found me at home. So I went to a refugee camp. The camp to accommodate refugees all the way from outside China in those days. At that time, because the communist march of Qingtao, the camp was almost weakened. So I went to the camp, found a sleeping place and something to eat. Stayed there for 3 or 4 days. Communist troops entered Qingdao. So I had to come out. It's safe for me to come out of the camp, and eventually went back home. Went back home. My mother, was so surprised to see me. Yeah, must be. But anyway, I went back home, and there I stayed until I was 18 years of age. During that time, I worked all sorts of jobs, from very low-class jobs. For some unknown reason, eventually, I decided to go to Hong Kong. A place never heard of in those days. But in my case, what I did, every morning I went to the beach, very close to my house, my old house. On the beach, every day I walked, in the water, up to my knee, and then come out the water, and then goes down. And that day, somehow, on the edge of the tide, I found a piece of newspaper. I picked it up. It's Hong Kong newspaper. So what is this? I then decided, when I went back home, I decided to go to Hong Kong. I didn't know where's the place, but anyway, I decided to come to Hong Kong. Eventually, I found out from the railway station Hong Kong is outside China. I said, well, if I go there, how do I buy ticket? They said, no, we are not selling tickets to Hong Kong. You have to go to a border country or something to get entry into Hong Kong. Eventually, I got a friend, Mr. Lee. He also wanted to go to Hong Kong, you know. I said, we go together. Okay. He's the man who knows some people in Hong Kong. I know no one in Hong Kong. I didn't know even Hong Kong people speak Cantonese, which I didn't know, not a word of it.
No.
And anyway, eventually, one evening, Mr. Lee came to our house and we walked after dinner with the baggage to the railway station, bought tickets to Hong Kong. No, this is no. I can only tell you a sector from here to Jinan. You know, Jinan is the capital of Shandong province, and then you have to change all the way to Beijing, 然后 all the way to I think is 四川了，然后再下来。All the way down from a city, I can't remember, and we come down to eventually you can go to Hong Kong. And eventually,
Oh, sorry.
I found that there are every day there are two railway stations, two railway go to Hong Kong. Every day, two. So I had to go the following day. So I slept in the railway station that night. The following day, we boarded this train, took us to Hong Kong. But not directly to Hong Kong. I didn't know it had to go to Shenzhen. Do you know? Shenzhen in those days was a small town with one or two wooden structures or brick structures, you know.
Yeah, sure.
But anyway, we went there, alighted from the train, gone through the immigration in a small hut with the PLA, People Liberation Army, guarding the place all over the place, you know. And then we went on foot, crossed the bridge of Shenzhen. There we are. Hong Kong. Oh boy. And then you enter Hong Kong, you know. And then the border area is clearly stated. You see, the Hong Kong, to China. So when cross the border, that's Hong Kong. I was free. So free, really free. Everything was free. So went to cross the border, got on the train, and eventually took us to Jianshanzui. We alighted from Jianshanzui station, and then went by ferry across the harbor. My friend Mr. Lee took me to his friend at the Gloucester Road. You may not know the road. It's still there, the Gloucester Road. His friend is husband and wife, you know. Mr. Lee introduced me to them and dropped me there. He then went away. I said, what am I going to do? I spoke to them and told them, well, I'll give you this is what you got a friend.
Yeah,
No.
帶低咗佢喺人哋嗰度，
No.
又唔識講
Well,
嘢。
you can't see here. They use the cocklops. Do you know what is cocklops?
角仔啊，
Oh, yeah.
Cocklops are in this flat. The view are not there inside. They live in cocklops. On top, there's cocklops, you know, very old and very low and very small. And
回到家瞓
Okay.，
瞓到第一瞓着。
And nearly 8 o'clock, I was so tired, I simply slept on the floor without any notice of them shouting me to get up. I slept in the morning. The following morning, I woke up. Oh, I found I was all right. So they spoke not a word to me and say, "You better go." I look around. Actually, the place, the courthouse is so small. They only put a bed there. And then I left with my bag. Walking along the street, I was to find something to eat. And I didn't know the language. I couldn't say what I want. Write the word bread to the storekeeper. He then sold it to me. I knew no one in Hong Kong. I had roughly over $10 or thereabout in my pocket. I didn't know where to live, where to go. I can't go back to the across the road place. Ah, boy. And eventually, for some reason, I came across a man who also came from Hong Kong before me. I came across this man. He knew me. Oh yeah, we were friends because we were learning Morse code in Hong Kong. He said, "Well, what do you do?" I had nothing to do. Okay, we'd better try to join the Hong Kong police. Okay. The following day, not the following day, I think the following week, after so many difficulties, after I've been sleeping on the street staircase for 6-7 days, then I went to the Western police station, where there's a long line of people waiting to be selected. So I was one of them. So I was one of 200. All spoke no Cantonese, but Northern knowledge. I went to several lines. Eventually, a European officer came along and to the selection put his fingers on my shoulder. I was selected. I was selected, stepped forward, and eventually the non-selected people had to disappear. So there was 100 or 200 disappeared, including my friend, who introduced me there.
嗰個喊唔到。
That's the last time I saw him. And eventually, those selected will have attend a written examination. So there's 30 or 40 people selected. But eventually, after written examination, I was one of 5 or 6, not more than 1, 4 or 6, or 3 or 4 people selected to be policemen. I was successful, but I couldn't go to police station. Do you know why? They said, "Well, you have to wait for your next team. And then they only wanted my address in order to write to me. I've got no address. So eventually I gave him the address I lived in one night across the road. Eventually, somehow I found there's a concentration camp. 永威没到说的是 at Western
摩星岭。
啊？
摩星岭啊。
摩星岭啊。Mount Davis. There's a concentration camp. I went there and found all the people there,
難民營嚟噶嘛？
all refugees. I knew no one. But eventually, somehow, before I left Shandong, a friend gave me an address. Number one, Gong Gong. He says, I had a friend working from this address. If you couldn't find any work or anything, you would like to find him. He would be helpful. Eventually, I somehow found Gong Gong. Do you know where Gong Gong?
聽過，
喺西營
Gong
盤，
Gong.
Tango.
Do you know where it is?
喺西營盤。
Because it's a narrow street, a Western police station, it's very difficult to find. But anyway, I went there and found the address. I asked the man, where is this man? Is he here? He said, no, the man's left a long time ago. He used to work as part-time, as a worker, coolie, carrying heavy food.
鼓勵
I said, where is he gone? Eventually, they asked their own people and found that he apparently went to Mount Davis. Do you know what Mount Davis is? Mount Davis?
Mount Davis 喺邊度㗎？
摩星嚟嘅咯。
有人信靠兩 one of the
If you go to Mount Davis in those days, you have to go through South Taiwan and get a boat and then cross the harbor.
我查過領啊嗰個係
And eventually, I want to find him. In order to save money, I walked all the way from Mount Davis to Saskatchewan along the tramway, all the way there. And eventually, I boarded this small boat, and then we crossed the harbor, and then landed in Mount Davis. And eventually, that place actually at that time was completely empty except a lot of rocks, mountains. They are blasting the mountain in order to produce rocks, And eventually I found him. Oh, very difficult to find him. But anyway, eventually I found him. Oh, he was a nice man. Told me to stay there with him as long as I like. And then I stayed with him in Mount Davis camp, you see, for 1 or 2 nights. And eventually, on his holiday, he took me back to, where's Mount?
係查過領翻嚟Mount Davis 咯。
Back to Western Mount, the hilltop at Western District. Why? Because he got 3 or 4 friends who were refugees who lived there. So he introduced me to them. You can stay here now. I said, very good. Very good. But the friend says, well, I can't help you with the food because the food provides does not allow more than how many people, But I said, it's all right. So every day I waited until the food is distributed. They left some left over. So I would have the leftover. I live in Mount Davis, but every day I went across the road to check the response from my recruitment, And eventually I received a letter to say, 23rd of May, you are required to report to the police station at Aberdeen. So eventually I went there and became a policeman. Oh boy. And on the first meal, so I allocated a table of 6. The food was extremely good. But the other people said, no, they're rubbish. To me, of course, I've never had it for a long time. Oh boy, so it's under training for 4 months and came out. As a policeman in Kowloon City district, I couldn't speak a word of Cantonese except yes or no, I. When I came across a man doing something wrong, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to say how you are arrested. Oh boy.
So do they not give you lessons? 有冇教你啊？
冇啊
But in those days, in the police in Hong Kong, there's a sector of Weihai Wei policemen, because I joined as part of the Weihai Wei sector.
Weihai Wei is Shandong.
And
They're supposed to be for their height, so they're traffic policemen. 嗰時係大隻，過啲廣東嗰啲咁瘦猛嘅咯，
瘦又矮嗰啲咯，
係咯。所以
大陸人不嬲都係好大隻啊嗰啲。Well, I think it's still the same color.
你問佢入俾錢我。
好食喎。
飽？
thank you.
夠唔夠啊？
Now, as the policeman in Hong Kong in those days, you have 3 kinds of duties to perform. One is actually patrol in an area allocated to you. In those cases, you have to speak the language in order to work properly. I couldn't. Second kind of duty is post duty.
Post.
In other words, you stand guard main gate or something like that. And also, above all, that kind is your traffic control, traffic guard. You're wearing a traffic coat, either walk in the area on the main road to stop obstruction of vehicles or whatever. And second, traffic post duty. Now in the road, in the middle of the jungle, you stood on stool and then regulate the traffic. And I became the traffic police for many years. And eventually, I learned driving, passed driving tests, and became a police driver. Became a police driver, and eventually I applied and transferred to what is known as the Identification Bureau, fingerprints. So I went to an area to learn how to identify a prisoner through the prints. Very good. And eventually I studied English and passed certain areas, school certificate examination passed, and then I applied to become an inspector. First time in history that a constable can ever be transferred or whatever, put as an inspector of the police. I attended the interview by the deputy commissioner, and eventually an examination was arranged for me and the others to attend the examination, English examination. I passed that examination with a flying color, and then transferred back to police training school to be trained as an inspector. And eventually I passed it and promoted from constable, wow, all the way to inspector, passing through so many ranks. Then transferred to Western Police, and in the meantime, of course, I go to church. I went to church every Sunday, King Road. Met this lady. And eventually led to our marriage. Oh boy, that's a long time. And when this young lady was born in Shandong hospital that night. You were born, mommy was in hospital with you, and Uncle Mill was with me. In the middle of the night, we said, no, we can't wait. There's no telephone call from the hospital. We better go. So we took transport and went to Kowloon Hospital. And there we're told, give birth successfully. Yeah? I eventually was promoted superintendent, the first man ever in Hong Kong to bypass so many people from one grade to the other. There were any. Newspaper was reported all over the place, and I was transferred to a job as superintendent. Oh, long time. Then eventually, the job led me to live in Prince Edward Road.
Yeah,
Huh?
that was a big
兩
house.
個大屋。
And we used to have
A
big
house.
parties. Give me that.
Yeah.
Really a house, and in those days, very houses in Hong Kong.
Yeah. And then, Mummy, she came and said that, we might be living in this big house, but this other man has to go back to England. So every night we prayed that he would go back to England, then we can live in a big house. Yes, it was very funny. Yes. We kind of say, 分手，分手，分手。You were going to say something too. Oh, well, I thought it was. How many years were we there?
4年咯。
Selena.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very happy.
我哋冇到。
On my retirement, 1975, having served for 25 years,
Right.
because my sickness all over the place. You see, for instance, my neck I can't move, so they have to put a hold my knife. That's something I can't
call 啦。
continue to work as a policeman. So I retired on medical ground in 1975, and then the whole family came here to London. 1975.